Picture this, a tepee on the open plains, canvas walls no thicker than a bedsheet flapping like crazy in a blizzard. The wind cuts sharper than a knife. The cold dives below -20, and yet whole families made it through the night. No electric heaters, no puffy down jackets, no fancy camp stoves. They played the hand they were dealt and somehow stacked the odds in their favor. Snow wasn't just snow. It became insulation. Smoke wasn't just smoke, it turned into a shield. Stones were portable heaters. Fat bark and fur turned into armor against the cold. 7 heating hacks, each one born from a different tribe, each one tested by centuries of brutal winters. These weren't creature comforts. They were life or death. And here's the kicker. For Native Americans, survival wasn't luck. It was knowledge, memory, a science of warmth that could still save your skin today. Imagine standing on the Great Plains in January. The wind doesn't just blow, it bites. Sharp as a knife, relentless. It howls across miles of frozen grass with nothing to slow it down. Now picture your home, a teepee cloth, walls no thicker than a bedsheet. You'd think that's a one-way ticket to hypothermia, and yet the Lakota made it work. Here's the trick. When the storms rolled in, families shoveled snow into banks' berms around the base of the teepee. Not to trap them in, but to trap out the cold. Snow looks like your enemy, but it's really just frozen air. Pack it tight, and it turns into insulation. What we call today a dead airspace. Exactly the same principle modern fiberglass insulation uses, except the Lakota had figured it out centuries earlier with nothing but shovels and muscle. Then came the smoke flaps. Those little wings at the top of the teepee weren't decoration, they were engineering. Turn them with the wind, and suddenly you had airflow smoke out heat in. It was like central heating powered by woodwind and memory. George Catlin painted it. Lewis and Clark wrote about it. And elders passed it on so the next winter wouldn't claim more lives. Think about it. No puffy down jacket from REI. No space heater from Walmart. No thermostat on the wall. And yet families, kids, elders, the whole household could stay alive through a night that would kill a man sleeping alone in minutes. Because survival here wasn't about gadgets. It was about community, about everyone knowing their role, who kept the fire, who banked the snow, who adjusted the flaps when the wind shifted. Snow berms, smoke flaps. Simple, yes, primitive, not a chance. It was natural engineering at its finest. And without it, the teepee would have been a freezer. With it, it became a shield. But here's the thing, snow only cuts the wind. When night fell, the cold still crept through every blanket. They needed something else, a kind of thermal battery to carry into their beds. Now imagine night falling on the plains. The teepee is quiet, the fire has burned low, and the cold creeps in like an uninvited guest. Blankets alone won't cut it. Even wrapped in furs, the frost still finds a way. What the Lakota did next was pure genius. They turned stones into heaters. Big river rocks, chunks of basalt pulled straight from creek beds. First, they were buried in the fire, glowing red, holding more heat than you'd think possible. Then carefully, they were wrapped in buffalo hide or thick fur, carried inside and tucked under the bedding. Suddenly, the floor beneath you wasn't an icebox. It was radiating warmth, hour after hour, all through the night. Think of it like this today. We buy pricey electric heating pads or plug-in space heaters. But back then, they had no outlets, no batteries, just fire and stone. And guess what? It worked. Those stones acted like thermal batteries, slowly releasing heat long after the flames went out. Families didn't just sleep warmer, they slept safer. Because freezing in your sleep wasn't rare. It was the #1 killer of the unprepared. This wasn't an individual trick. It was teamwork. Adults managed the fire, kids gathered stones, elders taught which rocks would hold heat without cracking. Everyone had a role. And that's the point. Survival was never about a lone hero toughing it out. It was a family system passed down generation to generation, polished, until it became second nature. James Walker wrote it down in 1917. Clark Whistler noted it in 1912. Traders and soldiers saw it with their own eyes. They couldn't believe a pile of rocks was saving lives. But the Lakota knew. They had centuries of proof. A heated stone wrapped and carried to bed. Primitive, not a chance. Try surviving a -30 night without one. That Stone Age tech might just beat your $100 sleeping pad. But here's the twist. Not every land had stones to spare. In the Northeast, another tribe solved the problem with something completely different: trees. Step inside an Iroquois longhouse. It's winter in upstate New York. The snow piles deep outside. The wind sneaks through the forest like a thief in the night. You'd expect a wooden shack to freeze solid, but the Haudenosaunee had something smarter. Their walls weren't made of thick European timber. They were sheets of elm bark layered like plywood, strip after strip lashed tight, sealed with care. On the outside, it looked simple. On the inside, it was survival. Bark wasn't just a skin, it was insulation. It flexed, it held heat, and when layered, it stopped the wind cold. Then came the curtains and mats. Picture heavy bark mats hung along the walls and thick layers spread across the floor. Not decoration protection. Every mat trapped pockets of air. Every layer kept cold from crawling up through the ground. Jesuit missionaries in the 1600s wrote it down: houses lined with bark mats. Archaeologists at Onondaga later dug up the proof-charred posts and bark remains from those same walls. Compare that to today. We spend thousands on insulation foam, panels, heated floors. But strip away electricity, strip away technology, and suddenly all that gear is dead weight. The Iroquois figured out how to beat the cold with nothing more than trees. That's not primitive. That's natural engineering. And it wasn't one person's trick. It was a system. Men stripped the bark, women wove the mats, children helped lay the floor. Everyone had skin in the game because if the house leaked heat, the whole family paid the price. Community wasn't optional. It was the only way through winter. Think about that: 30 people, one long house, a fire in the middle, and bark walls holding it all together. They didn't just survive, they turned a forest into a fortress of warmth. But farther north, bark and wood alone couldn't cut it. When the cold hit 40 below, another people turned to a single flame, the Inuit lamp that could light, cook, and heat all at once. Now push farther north. Past the forests, past the rivers, all the way into the Arctic. Outside, it's 40 below. The wind doesn't just sting, it crushes. A man standing in the open won't last an hour. And yet step inside an igloo and the air's warm. Families talk, cook, even sleep in comfort. The secret wasn't firewood. There were no trees. The secret was a single lamp. The Inuit called it the cloak. A shallow bowl carved from soapstone filled with seal oil lined with moss for a wick. That's it. One flame small enough to fit in your hands, yet powerful enough to heat an ice house. While the world outside froze solid, the cloak gave steady warmth, light to see, and a flame to cook on. 3 life-saving jobs from one simple design. Think about your gear today. Gas stoves run out of fuel. Batteries die in the cold. Electric heaters. Forget it. But seal oil burned slow, reliable hour after hour. The Inuit had no backup system because they didn't need one. They engineered resilience out of the land itself. Archaeologists call it Thule culture. 1,000 years ago, they were already using hundreds of these lamps. The Smithsonian has them. The Canadian Museum of History displays them. Proof carved in stone that a people living in the most brutal climate on Earth found warmth where no one else could. But this wasn't just technology, it was family. Women tended the cloak, passing the skill from mother to daughter, generation after generation. Keeping that flame alive meant keeping the family alive. Lose the fire and you lose everything. One lamp, one flame, one community. Not primitive, not lucky, but genius. Because when survival comes down to a single night at 40 below, high-tech gear won't save you. Memory will, but warmth didn't stop at tools. It lived in the very clothes people wore, and in the fat they rubbed on their skins. Their bodies became their next line of defense. Now let's head south into the Appalachian Mountains. The wind here is different. It doesn't just blow at cuts. It threads its way through the trees and knifes straight into your bones. Rain turns to sleet snow to slush. Cold and wet, the deadliest combination. The Cherokee didn't have waterproof jackets from Patagonia. They didn't have Gore-Tex membranes, nylon shells, or high-tech coatings. What they had was deer and bear, and the knowledge of how to turn nature into armor. Picture it: a hunter returns with a fresh deer hide. It's tanned, softened, cut into a heavy cloak. That cloak is already warm, already thick. But then comes the upgrade animal grease. Bare fat deer tallow rubbed into the hide until it shines. Waterproof, windproof, nearly bulletproof against the elements. James Adair, writing in 1775, described how they coated skins with oil to keep out the damp. William Bartram saw it again in the 1790s. And in Cherokee museums today, you can still see those cloaks reconstructed. It sounds simple, but don't underestimate it. A deer hide cloak with grease was the 1700s version of a $500 parka. Hydrophobic, breathable, flexible. When you're shivering in the rain, it's the difference between life and death. And it wasn't just a lone survivor trick. Families made these cloaks together. Elders taught the tanning. Women processed the hides. Men hunted the deer. Knowledge flowed down the generations, so no one was left without a shield against the cold. Think about your own closet, maybe 10 coats, half of them unused. The Cherokee didn't have closets. They had memory. They had systems. And those systems worked. Because here's the truth. Survival wasn't about staying stylish. It was about staying alive. And with deer fat and fire, they engineered a cloak that outsmarted winter. But clothing could only protect the individual. What about the whole family packed into one lodge on a freezing night? That's where the Blackfoot come in with a heating hack that turned community itself into a furnace. Now picture a Blackfoot lodge in the dead of winter. Snow piles against the tepee walls, the wind shrieks outside, and the temperature is dropping faster than a stone in a well. No sleeping bags, no heated blankets, just fur hides and one another. So what did they do? They slept together. Not just husband and wife, but the whole family. Parents, children, grandparents, even dogs curled up under the same covers. To a modern eye, it might look crowded, maybe even uncomfortable. But to the Blackfoot, it was survival science. Clark Whistler described it in 1911. Families arranged themselves carefully, elders and children in the center, where heat stayed most steady adults, forming a shield around them. Dogs filled in gaps, four-legged space heaters that barked as well as breathed. George Bird Grinnell wrote about it too. Whole households huddled through the winter storms. And the science checks out. Pack enough warm bodies in a small space, and the air temperature rises. A few degrees might not sound like much, but when you're on the razor's edge of freezing, that's the difference between life and death. It was quite literally a living furnace. Compare that to today. You can spend hundreds on a down bag, a high-R insulation pad, a tent rated for -40. But if you sleep alone, your body loses heat fast. Meanwhile, the Blackfoot turned family into technology. They engineered warmth out of trust, loyalty, and sheer closeness. And this wasn't just a one-off trick. It was a system passed down and remembered. Who slept where, how many layers, when to bring in the dogs. It was all taught, practiced, and perfected over generations. Think of that survival not as individual toughness, but as a community ritual. In a world that glorifies the lone survivor, the Blackfoot remind us that warmth comes from togetherness. but sometimes even closeness wasn't enough. That's why in the Northeast, another people built something even larger, a robe so big the whole group could sleep under it. Now picture a winter night on the frozen lakes of Ontario and Quebec. The wind howls across the ice, the trees groan under snow, and the night feels endless. 1 blanket, not enough. 2, still not enough. The Algonquin and Ojibwe knew the answer wasn't more little covers, it was one giant one. They stitched together hides, beaver, moose deer into massive sleeping robes, big enough for the whole group to crawl under. No gaps, no drafts, just one body of warmth shared across the family. Champlain wrote about it in 1615, calling them great robes of skins. Jesuit missionaries described the same thing, fur blankets so wide they covered everyone. Archaeologists and historians confirm it. This was the winter shield of the Great Lakes peoples. And it worked. Modern science tells us many small blankets leave cracks, and cracks leak heat. But one continuous robe seals the edges, traps the air, stops the cold from sneaking in. It's the same principle behind modern family-size sleeping bags. Only difference, the Algonquin figured it out 400 years ago with nothing but needles made of bone and hides sewn tight. Now think about today. We pile on individual gear, each person with their own sleeping bag, their own pad, their own jacket. And still we shiver. Meanwhile, the Ojibwe wrapped a family in one robe and slept warm until morning. That wasn't just clever, it was community turned into engineering. And that's the bigger point. These robes weren't just hides sewn together, they were memory sewn together. Knowledge carried forward fur by fur, stitch by stitch. It wasn't survival of the individual. It was survival of the family, the camp, the people. One robe, one night, one community. That's what beat the cold. But these 7 hacks together reveal something greater. Native survival wasn't luck. It was wisdom engineered into warmth. Snow, stone, bark, fat, fur, even the family itself. For Native peoples, survival wasn't about luck. It wasn't about stumbling through the storm and hoping for the best. It was memory knowledge passed down, engineered into warmth. Think about that the next time you're scrolling for the latest survival gear. High-dollar sleeping pads, jackets rated for Arctic expeditions, gadgets with batteries that die the minute the cold bites. All of it feels high-tech, but without power or fuel. It's just dead weight. The Lakota, the Iroquois, the Inuit, the Cherokee, the Blackfoot, the Ojibwe, they built heating systems out of nothing but what the land gave them. And they worked. Here's the truth. Survival was never about the lone wolf. It was about the pack. Families huddled together, skills handed down, systems remembered and repeated until they became second nature. That's the real science of warmth. So tell me, which hack surprised you the most? Drop a comment below. And hit subscribe because the next winter is always closer than you think.